Well, weeks of Russian strikes on Odesa, Ukraine's key Black Sea gateway, have crippled port operations and shipping. Agricultural exports, a cornerstone of Ukraine's economy and global food supplies, well, they have nearly been brought to a standstill. Trade in other goods is also suffering. Along with port infrastructure, the strikes have been targeting the roads, bridges, and the railways that connect the Odesa region to the rest of Europe. Passenger trains are among the targets, like this one that was hit by drones on Sunday, forcing the evacuation of hundreds of people. Another drone strike hit this railway station early on Saturday. Russia is also using missiles. Ukraine, lacking air defenses, is struggling to fend off the assaults. Ukraine is marking 35 years of independence today, but more than 4 years into Russia's full-scale invasion, there is another question. What does independence look like if Moscow succeeds in cutting Ukraine off from the sea? Well, my next guest argues that Russia's goal may be to turn Ukraine's most important Black Sea port, Odesa, as far as function goes, into a landlocked city. Michael Bociurkiw is a senior non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council and founder and author of the Substack World Briefing. Michael, it's good to have you on the program. Let me just ask you how things are right now, 35 years after independence. How independent can Ukraine remain economically if Russia cuts it off from the Black Sea?
Yeah, good to be with you. Well, who would have thought we would arrive at this day where we're not certain what type of Ukraine will emerge when the war ends. It will end, but what will happen, one of the things I'm very concerned about, because how can you have independence if you have no people, is the demographic hollowing out of Ukraine. Millions have already left, millions are displaced, and if forecasts for this coming winter in Odesa and elsewhere in Ukraine are correct, that it's going to be even worse than last winter when there were long periods without heating, power and water, there will be many, many more Ukrainians leaving, especially from Odesa region into Moldova, probably neighboring European countries, and it will become Europe's problem once again.
Yeah, I want to let our viewers know you live in Odesa, and earlier this month, a Russian drone struck your street. The city's stadium was hit. I mean, this has been almost too close for comfort. How has this affected you personally?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. Well, look, I'm someone who served with the UN in Gaza, the West Bank, many crisis theaters, Myanmar, Pakistan, and elsewhere. So my radar is quite well attuned, and also my tolerance for inconvenience, let's say. But I really felt that the war is starting to close in. I still live there in an area which we used to refer to as the Green Zone because it was bordered by the Chinese consulate on one end, Turkish on the other. We never thought that Russia would be so bold as to bomb so closely to these very key diplomatic posts, but they have. And, it's also the recurrence of the alarms. And now that Russia especially is using faster, high-powered drones with jet engines, the time you have between air raid sirens going off and the time you can reach a bomb shelter is getting shorter and shorter. Never mind about ballistic missiles. There's no time whatsoever. So it creates a lot of panic. I'm one of the lucky ones, frankly. I can leave, but all of those older folks and people with families or who don't have the means to leave, they're in very dire straits.
You argue, Michael, that Russia is trying to make Odesa functionally landlocked. What exactly is Moscow trying to destroy here?
Sure. Well, they've succeeded, at least temporarily, in suspending operations at Odesa port. This is Odesa port that feeds the world. When they cut off the port in 2022, food prices went way up, spiked, putting something like 70 million people in increased risk of food security. There are basically three ports in Odesa, and between those three, they account for something like 60% of monthly export revenues for Ukraine of about 3.5 billion, most of that being agriculture. And, for the first time, when you look out at Odesa port, you see these immobilized ships that have been struck by Russia, something like 50, causing 30 civilian deaths. and there's at least one on the bottom of the seabed. Also, what's been happening now that they've done that, they're also striking land targets further closer to the Moldova-Romanian border. Past few days, striking a border checkpoint, striking rail lines, striking roadways. And that's my other fear. As all of this cargo and ship is transferred to road and rails, they're also starting to try and cut that off. It's a pattern that we're pretty sure is happening deliberately by the Russian forces.
You know, Ukraine is also attacking Russian ports. I mean, there is this back and forth when it comes to attacking infrastructure, transport, energy. At what point does Russia's blockade become part of a broader economic war that is being waged by both sides?
Well, let's be clear where we are. It's not one side against one side. It's one side, Ukraine, against a side that has very strong, let's call them co-belligerents, Iran being one, North Korea being another. Reports that North Korea may send now 30,000 troops to fight in Ukraine, on seized Ukrainian territory. And also, let's not forget, in the background, China providing dual-use technology. So that's a lot of resources to throw at Ukraine. Ukraine is doing the best it can. Today, it was announced, of course, the UK is going to provide it blueprints for producing on its own long-range missiles. But I'm really, really worried about the near term, where, again, because there are no Patriot missiles or kit available to bring down these incoming ballistic missiles, which Russia seems to have a lot of, it's going to make life increasingly difficult for Ukrainians. Many of them telling me they're at wit's end, and many leaving Odesa as well, you know, the entrepreneurial heart of Ukraine.
You know, Odesa and these neighboring ports, they handle a huge share of Ukraine's exports. Talk me through what happens to food prices if a Russian disruption, if that can be sustained.
Well, the thing is, a lot of the grain, the corn that is being exported from World Port Odesa goes to countries that are on the brink of starvation, Middle East, North Africa. They don't go to some wealthier countries. And, you know, two things could happen. One, it could, again, increase food insecurity for tens of millions of people, as it did in 2022. But also, it could very well raise prices for ordinary consumers where you are in Europe and possibly in the United States. And you know what? Maybe that needs to happen in a place like the US. I'm not talking about collective punishment, but when folks there start to see gas prices rise as they have, also food prices, and many are on the brink, that could put more pressure on Donald Trump and his MAGA movement to bring an end to this senseless war, put more pressure on Mr. Putin to come to the negotiating table. But I'm not too optimistic about that at the moment, unfortunately.
You know, this war is over 4 years old now. Russia has struggled to achieve a decisive battlefield breakthrough. If it cannot capture Odesa, is the strategy now to destroy its usefulness to Ukraine? I mean, if it can't have Odesa, then no one will.
Look, nothing is off the table in terms of Russia. This is a country that doesn't care about committing war crimes on an industrial scale. It doesn't care about expanding its hybrid warfare to places like Germany or further into Europe. And I don't think it cares about the sufferings of its own people. I mean, I'm here in Thailand at the moment, and there are a lot of Russians here, and many of them telling me they are escaping the war, they don't want to be there. So I do fear that if there's no red lines enforced by the West for Russia, it will go further and further, not only in terms of the brutality and the scale of destruction inside Ukraine, but also going further beyond Ukraine's borders. And this is something European leaders not only need to realize, but I think also the time has come to tell their people that we have to go on a wartime footing. We have to adopt a wartime economy. Otherwise, this war is going to come to us as well. That's the way it should have been put to ordinary folks in Europe a long, long time ago.
Do you see Ukraine's allies getting the point that they have to provide, air defense missiles, for example, in order to keep the Black Sea open. I mean, do you foresee that happening, or do you think that it's going to be too little, too late?
Well, the will is certainly there among many of them, but the problem is because of the senseless war the U.S. Is waging in Iran, the stocks are very much depleted. So there's a long lineup of other countries that need Patriot missile systems, and there's hardly enough to go around to Ukraine. So it's a very, very difficult, dangerous time for Ukraine right now, not being able to defend itself against these missiles. However, it is doing an amazing job in terms of putting more long-range firepower into Russia, disrupting its infrastructure. But once again, how much pain can the Russian people take before there's some kind of mass movement that rises up against Mr. Putin to bring him to a more sensible position? A hard question to answer.
You also point to the role of Turkey in this conflict. Does Turkish President Erdogan, does he have more leverage than anyone else to help reopen or to help secure Black Sea shipping? Is he the man that everyone wants or needs to talk to?
Yeah, Turkey has a huge skin in the game when it comes to Black Sea security. It has huge investments in Ukraine. It's been involved in the reconstruction effort. It's been involved in, prisoner swaps, earlier the peace talks. And I think Mr. Erdogan is widely respected by Mr. Trump, by Mr. Putin, by key interlocutors. But I'm wondering why he's not taking a more prominent position right now. The other thing, as I've written as well and said on air, is Mr. Zelensky, given what's going on in the United States right now, the unreliability of Mr. Trump, is maybe to put in a call to Mr. Xi Jinping of China, because he does have a lot of sway over Mr. Putin, over Iran, over North Korea, all co-belligerents in this war. I think you have to use all options on the table at the moment because time is not on Ukraine's side, unfortunately.
And Michael, before we run out of time, you were saying that Europeans in particular, they need to realize how acute this crisis is. Odesa, people in Odesa, they're already preparing for another difficult winter. Could attacks on ports and energy infrastructure trigger another major refugee movement toward Europe?
Absolutely, and it's already happening. People in Odesa, my neighbors, friends, have already either made preparations to be outside of Odesa in their cottages or whatever, or make preparations to leave the country altogether, at least temporarily. Again, it's not easy for many people because they don't have the means, and it's very expensive, as you well know, to live in Europe. And a lot of the benefits that Ukrainians originally availed of when they left Ukraine at the start of the war are no longer there. So they can't just pick up and go. But, maybe preparations need to be made in places like Moldova, Romania, Poland, on the borders, these kind of, refugee reception centers or migrant reception centers to help Ukrainians. Thank God Ukrainian is so digitalized that everyone has their documents now, at least on their smartphones. But of course, that's not enough to get you through what could be very, very tough times.
Yeah. Michael Bociurkiw, good to talk with you. Michael, we appreciate you sharing your stories, personal stories as well. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.